abruptly canceled a Washington visit by a high-level Israeli delegation after the U.S. declined to veto a UN resolution that was demanding an immediate ceasefire for Gaza.
The move came amid rising tensions between the two allies over Israel's planned ground invasion of Rafah in southern Gaza. More than 1 million Palestinian civilians have taken shelter there, and the U.S. fears an attack would result in unnecessary civilian deaths. Israel says thousands of Hamas fighters are massed in Rafah, and it has no choice but to go forward with the operation. Joining us now, Morgan Lorraine Viña, Senior Fellow, National Security Institute. She's also the former Chief of Staff and Senior Policy Advisor to Nikki Haley, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Good morning to you. So this resolution failed 4 times before yesterday because the U.S. used its veto power. But yesterday, the U.S. chose to abstain instead and allow this measure to pass, which upset Israel. What does that decision by the U.S. signal about U.S.-Israeli relations going forward?
Thanks for having me. Unfortunately, it was only a matter of time before the United States caved to international pressure, particularly in the UN Security Council. The situation in Gaza, humanitarian situation, has worsened significantly throughout the course of the Israeli incursion into Gaza. Hamas has had a very successful job at prolonging the hostage situation, which has only furthered the suffering of the Palestinian people. Israel has made it quite clear that it will continue to conduct military operations in Gaza, including an invasion into Rafah, until those hostages are released. I will note that the United States has hostages in, Hamas has American hostages in Gaza right now. This UN Security Council resolution really, I think, is a demonstration of the Biden administration's frustration with the Netanyahu government and its prolonged military operations.
And there's been recent reporting suggested that a string of recent American presidents, with maybe one notable exception, privately at least, support Israel and having democracy, of course, in that region of the world, but are really tired of Netanyahu and his brand of politics and how he is to deal with behind the scenes. We're just seeing that boil over now because of the conflict in Gaza. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, though, who has the leverage here? Because at the end of the day, Israel needs our support and our money and our weapons, but also Biden needs to not upset Jewish American or Muslim American voters too much. And I'm wondering, as all this plays out publicly, who has the juice in the situation to stay on track and not cave, Bibi or Biden?
You know, I think you point to a very interesting point here, and that is domestic politics, both in Israel and in the United States. Prime Minister Netanyahu has significant support and is under a lot of pressure to continue military operations and get those hostages back. President Biden, on the other hand, he's got a general election just a few short months away, and he has to appease the Muslim population here in the United States. I mean, we saw particularly in Michigan, the uncommitted vote, 100,000 Michigan voters voted uncommitted. And so while I think pollsters have varying degrees of how much that will actually impact Biden in the November election, it nevertheless sent a message. Right now, the United States, I don't think, is considering withholding aid, although the State Department's public representative did leave that window open. I do think, though, that any withholding of U.S. security assistance to Israel would have massive blowback in the Congress.
Mm-hmm. On a practical level, what does this UN Security Council call for a ceasefire actually mean? A call does not mean that Israel and Hamas have to follow it.
Right. So the UN Security Council resolution is one of those that sends a very, very strong signal to the Israeli government that the international community, particularly the P5 members, the United States, Russia, China, the UK, and France, are not with Israel right now. The United States abstained. It did not veto. I will note that Hamas was not condemned in the entire resolution. It simply called on the U.S. hostages to be released and Israel to engage in a ceasefire throughout Ramadan. This is, I think, a big blow to the Israeli government. We've seen the United States abstain in previous administrations on Israeli votes. We saw Resolution 2334 in 2016 at the end of the Obama administration, in which the United States abstained, essentially throwing Israel under the bus internationally. And so I think Israel realizes that it has lost the United States and that the United States will continue to use the multilateral forums to register its disapproval of Netanyahu.
But it would strike me as it's only a hit to the Israeli government if the government and Netanyahu in particular change their behavior. And whether it's Russia going to Ukraine or whether it's Gaza, we've learned that certain world leaders don't respond well to votes and speeches and sternly worded letters. That doesn't cut it anymore for strong men who want to do what the hell they want to do. Do you think this changes Netanyahu's calculus in any measurable way in terms of the war or the suffering of the people in Gaza?
At the end of the day, Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to cater to Israeli politics. He answers to the Israeli citizens, not to the United States. I don't think that the Israeli government is in any way at risk of not receiving continued U.S. security assistance. At the same time, though, that political support from the White House is in jeopardy right now. We do see Defense Minister Yoav Gallant come to the United States while Prime Minister Netanyahu did cancel a high-level delegation at the request of the White House, I might add. Defense Minister Gallant continued those discussions with SecDef Austin, with Jake Sullivan, and Tony Blinken. And so there is a level of cooperation and communication that continues, particularly surrounding the release of the hostages and those negotiations with Hamas. But generally speaking, I think what we're seeing here is some pretty tough times ahead for both Biden and Netanyahu.
And how it politically plays out should be fascinating. And thank you for mentioning the hostages. In the middle of all the brinksmanship and politics, there are human lives that have been now for months held captive. Morgan Lorraine Viña, Senior Fellow, National Security Institute. Really good conversation. Thanks for your insight. Appreciate it. We'll be right back with more after this.
Thanks for having me.